Hi, today I will tell you a really scary story from life from which goes a shiver through the body. For my efforts, I ask from you only like to maintain the channel. Enjoy the video. From 2019 to 2024. Canada. Vancouver, British Columbia. Mass murders were recorded in the forest, next to which a residential village was located. The victims were women and men aged 23 to 35. Detective Christopher Smith took over the investigation. The bodies of the victims were dismembered, arms, legs, and the head were scattered in different parts of the forest. The torso was missing. It turned out that the serial killer was a cannibal. The torso was used for consumption. In mid-February 2024, Detective Smith apprehended a cannibal. She was a petite, European-looking girl. She looked young for her age, 5 feet 2 inches pounds, 157 centimeters, tall. Round face shape. Pale skin, thin lips, dark circles under her eyes, from lack of sleep. Round eyes, brown color. Her right eye was missing, only a prosthetic eye socket that covered the empty eye socket instead of a healthy eye. Brown hair, bob haircut without bangs. She had elastic bandages on her arms that covered both her arms to the elbow. Her accessories included a heart-shaped pendant. She lived near this village. A search warrant was conducted in her house. It turned out that a fragment of a human body was found in the refrigerator. They also found a hidden basement in the floor in the house, which was hidden behind a pile of boxes. The woman used the basement to store human remains. Haru Mitchell was born on June 29, 1999, in the south of Ukraine in an average statistical family. Father John Mitchell is a Canadian who came to Ukraine in 1995 to work as a doctor. Mother Stephanie Mitchell is Ukrainian. Before meeting John, she worked as a waitress. After marriage and the birth of her daughter, she became a housewife. On July 7, 2005, Haru's younger brother Alexander Mitchell is born, short Alec. Even despite the age difference of 6 years, Haru and Alex were in a good relationship. This is the merit of John and Stephanie. After the birth of their son, they did not forget about their daughter, gave her attention, love and care, if only she did not feel unloved after the birth of her brother. Haru's parents were decent, did not drink alcohol, did not accept physical or moral violence against their children. Did not punish them for little things. John and Stephanie raised their children well, and the girl had a good relationship between both parents. But the huge connection was with her father. They often spent time together, walked, played, talked to each other. John and Haru had a lot in common. John could support his daughter and was proud of her talents and achievements. The girl herself was happy to be a daddy's girl. Haru had an excellent relationship with her mother. The woman loved her daughter and was nice to her, even though Haru spent more time with her father than with her. Haru Mitchell had a good childhood. In addition to Alex, Haru had a cousin on her mother's side, Mikhail. The age difference was 3 years. Young Mitchell spent more time with him, playing outside, in the yard or at home. After all, he was her friend. Haru's education at school was difficult. The girl studied mostly at CS and BS. She was not mentally retarded. School subjects were difficult for her because of the outdated program and the system of cramming. But her favorite subject at school was history and biology. There the girl got only A's and easily understood the topic of the lesson. Haru's classmates avoided her. Since John communicated with his daughter in English, Haru used English words in her speech, while talking to the interlocutor in Russian or Ukrainian. Peers, not knowing English, considered Haru a country. They did not communicate with her, sometimes teased her, but Mitchell's parents reacted in time. Especially Stephanie, and the bullying of the girl stopped. Despite this, Haru had school friends. She finished only 9 grades with only CS and BS. Already being 15 years old, the teenager Alex was 9 years old at that time. The parents decided to move to Canada for the sake of a bright and good future for their children. Already in Canada, the family began to live together with Mason Mitchell, Haru, and Alex's cousin on his father's side. Also with his wife Mary Mitchell and their common child Robert Mitchell, who was 16 years old and was Haru and Alex's cousin. Mason, although he was a seemingly strict man working as a lumberjack, treated his nephews well, could make them laugh with his jokes or tell them an interesting fact about wild animals. Despite his kindness and cheerful nature, Mason could be strict not only with his nephews, but also with his son. Mary was a pastry chef by profession, working in a cafe, selling her desserts. Her activities were justified by the sweet nature of the woman. Mary was a sweet, compassionate woman. It was difficult to anger her. It was thanks to her that Haru would become interested in baking and confectionery in the future. Robert became Haru's best friend. They not only lived in the same house, but also went to the same class. Robert helped his cousin better adapt to Canada and her school. At first, Haru felt uncomfortable, knowing her past school experience. Fortunately for her, everything turned out completely differently than she expected. Haru reached out in school subjects, made new friends. Although they were Robert's friends, young Mitchell felt comfortable with them. Her classmates treated her well, she managed to get an education, but the family was replenished with new relatives and lived together in harmony. It seemed that Haru's life in Canada was going well, but, unfortunately, it only got worse. In the spring, on March 19, 2014, John Mitchell was returning home from work late at night. The weather was unfavorable. It was raining heavily, the road was slippery, and it was easy to drive off the road. John was careful that evening, but even that did not save him. He got into a car accident. Another driver lost control and crashed into Mitchell's car. A shard of windshield penetrated John's carotid artery. He was immediately hospitalized, but died on the way to the hospital. This news shocked the Mitchell family. But Haru got it the most. The girl withdrew into herself, reluctantly talked to relatives and friends, lost motivation for her favorite activity. Drawing brought only pain. The dream of becoming an artist is meaningless if her father is not around. She completely blew off her studies, she could have been expelled. But only thanks to Robert this did not happen. The boy did Haru's homework while she was depressed. Her father's death had a strong effect on her. Stephanie signed her children up for therapy so they could cope with the loss of their father. Several months passed. Haru was finally able to come to terms with her father's death. To feel his presence, she bought a gold heart-shaped pendant. In this way, she made it clear to herself that her father was nearby, if not physically, then morally. The pendant is a symbol that her father will be with her all the moments of her future life. She wore this pendant every time she was going somewhere, to the city, to school, for a walk, on holidays, etc. Mitchell could thus feel her father's presence. Rather, Stephanie married Mason's friend twice. He turned out to be Scott Cooper, a police officer, and had a good reputation in the city. The man sometimes appeared at holidays or family gatherings. When John died, he began to support Mason, but most of all Stephanie. Cooper explained this by the fact that he understood what it was like to lose a loved one, since he himself had lost his wife. Thus, the two became close. Then they got married. When Haru was 16, Alex had just turned 10. Scott's relationship with Stephanie and Alex was good. He loved his new wife. They had a healthy relationship with mutual understanding, honesty, and kindness. Scott treated Alex like his son, played with him, bought him expensive gifts, supported him and helped him with his studies. But he hated Haru. At first, he made comments to her, as she said, she dresses too vulgarly, is not able to provide for herself, will be a domestic invalid. And no one will marry her like that. Haru did not take Scott's words and behavior seriously, until her new stepfather crossed the line. The man tried to control his stepdaughter's life, checked her phone, read her correspondence with her friends. If he found something ridiculous or inappropriate, he shamed Haru in every possible way so that she would not write such nonsense anymore. She had to constantly change her password on her phone, just so that her stepfather would not check anything on it. In addition to monitoring her phone, he also dug into her personal information, broadcasted, looked for cigarettes, booze, or condoms. He was not even stopped when Haru saw Scott in an indecent act. He explained that since she communicated with Robert's friends, she 100% had some kind of intimate relationship with one of them. He had a rule: until Haru is 18, no communication with guys, with the exception of relatives. Guys were not mentioned. He believed that a girl who communicated with guys before coming of age was an underage prostitute. And of course, he insulted Haru, said that she was scum, creature, bitch, underage slut, whore. He was irritated by the fact that his stepdaughter missed her dad a lot. He believed that her condition was a fiction and required a lot of attention. Although the psychotherapist himself confirmed that this was not so, the stepfather did not care. He didn't forget, insulted the late John, saying what an ungrateful daughter he raised and what a lousy father he was. Haru herself was silent and patient. She didn't want her mother and Alex to be upset. In front of everyone, Scott and Haru behaved as if they had found a common language, but when her mother or brother were not home, the essence of their relationship would come out. No one knew about it. They hid their true relationship from everyone quite well. But in the end, Haru insulted her stepfather back. She did not allow this man to humiliate her further. She always insulted him back. Sometimes she would hit him and throw objects at him that came to hand. Cooper himself did not hit, only verbally insulted. Until one incident, July 15, 2016, when Haru was 17 years old. That day, she was supposed to go to their mutual friend's birthday party with Robert. Miss Mitchell and young Mitchell were not home. The younger one was very ill and went to the hospital. His mother decided to visit him that day. So the stepdaughter was alone with her stepfather. The moment Cooper found out where Haru was going, another quarrel began. He did not want to let her go there. She should stay at home, do all the chores that he would tell her to do. Of course, Haru protested, saying that he had no right to dispose of her free time. She would definitely go to her friend's birthday party because she promised, and she would not sit at home because her new daddy wanted it that way. With this statement, Haru turned around and was about to leave the house, having agreed with her cousin where to meet, turning off her phone, but suddenly Scott pounced on her. When Haru came to, the first thing she saw was darkness and pain in her eye. Question: why was there a bandage there? The events came together. The realization of what had happened a few minutes ago. Haru found herself in the basement of her own house with her eye gouged out. It is important to note that the basement was not in her house, but in the garage, and it was also soundproof. If she started screaming, she would not be heard. Out of fear, she began to cry until the door opened and it was her stepfather. Approaching her stepdaughter, she asked him, "Why?" Instead of the explanation she wanted, she received a strong slap. Then he began to beat her. As soon as he finished, he replied, "This is for your disobedience," and left. The beatings and humiliation occurred when he visited the basement, treating her cruelly. he punched her in the face, kicked her in the stomach with such force that Haru would vomit or cough up blood, stepped on her limbs with his shoes, crushing them until they were bruised. He strangled her until she lost consciousness, hit her on the head with a fist or an object, causing dizziness, concussion, and memory loss. He pulled her hair, tearing out a clump of hair, and finally threw it on the floor. After severe injuries, he left the basement as if nothing had happened, while the teenager lay in a pool of her own blood or vomit. And she suffered from pain. Scott showed only physical violence towards his stepdaughter. There was no sexual violence. During the entire time spent in the basement, the stepfather did not attempt to rape. On the contrary, he liked what he did to Haru. Once a week, he poured cold water on her as an alternative to hygiene. He came with a bucket, cold water, and a towel, told Haru to strip naked. He himself did not look at her, only turned his head away and asked if she was ready. When Haru answered that she was ready, he poured water on her and threw the towel on the floor. And left again. He did not care that this way she could easily get sick, and when she was sick, he did not care. He could give a couple of pills, calling her weak. Stepfather never gave her soap, only toothpaste and a brush, if only Haru's teeth did not become weaker. And no compassion in her direction. Scott not only loved to beat her, but also to starve her. He did not give her food for several days. Haru could only make do with water to avoid dying of thirst. When she was given food, it was oatmeal and bread. But even they could not remove the hunger. Mitchell lost 20 kilograms from her typical 45 kilograms. Luckily for Haru, when she began to lose weight, her stepfather stopped beating her. From the weight loss, she began to weaken. She did not have the strength to walk to her alternative toilet. She had to urinate on herself. Her period was late due to stress and lack of food. She also suffered from stomach pains. In order to somehow not die of hunger, Haru decided to eat herself. Quotes from Mitchell's interrogation: "One day my stepfather gave me a flashlight to make it easier for me to find myself in the basement. I decided to examine it in search of items that would help me escape. But I only found a hunting knife. Of course, I could have killed my stepfather that way, but I refrained. After all, I was hungry and weak to resist him. So I decided on a radical act. Were you afraid to do this? Yes, but the feeling of hunger is stronger than fear. But at first, I only made cuts on my wrist. To get used to the pain, I carefully cut the flesh on my hand so as not to lose much blood. As soon as I got a thin piece of flesh, I swallowed it. When my stepfather saw my bloody hands, he provided medical assistance and took away the knife, finally. Haru's hands were filled with pus. She wasn't just suffering from the purulent ulcers on her hands. Scott had also treated her hands and eye socket with alcohol and antiseptic on his damaged eye socket, but that didn't even help. Haru's condition was getting worse, especially her mental state. She knew that her end would soon come and she needed to act. In the basement, Haru found a screwdriver. An escape plan immediately formed in her head. Safely hiding the find and waiting for the right moment. Specifically, when her stepfather would come to change the bandages. As soon as that day came, she waited. Haru was very afraid to act. What if her stepfather's reaction would exceed hers? What if she tried, he would snatch the screwdriver and beat her? In this situation, it was either him or her. If she didn't take the risk, she would die of hunger or from beatings. But if everything worked out, she would be free. When her stepfather began to change the bandages on his face, she quietly took out the screwdriver and waited for the right moment, pretended to accidentally touch the first aid kit, and it fell to the floor. Scott, in turn, bent down to pick up the medicine that had fallen to the floor. This was the right moment. Gathering all her will into a fist, she made her first move and sharply plunged the screwdriver into her stepfather's eye. Scott immediately pulled away and was about to pull out the screwdriver, but Mitchell's determination was strong. She took the scissors and plunged the sharp blade into his neck as sharply as possible. Cooper was choking on blood. Haru continued to strike with the scissors. Blow after blow. She did not stop. She was very afraid that if she stopped, he would beat her, even though Scott was already powerless to fight back. In the end, he died at the hands of his stepdaughter, who had a strong spirit of life. Haru struck 38 times with the scissors. Having made sure that her stepfather was dead, she did not get out of the basement. When the door was opened, she remained sitting on the floor, not believing what was happening, often repeating to herself, "This is all a dream, this is not reality." But once her own mother discovered her, she realized that everything that was happening was real. September 20th, 2016. The stepdaughter was released from captivity in the basement of her own home. Haru's body was in serious condition: pale, sickly skin, thin body, bruises, purulent ulcers. She was dirty and unkempt, which is why her hair fell out not only from a lack of vitamins, but also because there was no hygiene. They found a bald spot in the place where her stepfather often hit her on the head. An unpleasant smell came from her, vomiting mixed blood and her own urine. To the question, was Haru looked for and why did the police not suspect Mr. Cooper? It's simple, he skillfully arranged her abduction, after all, having worked in the police for many years, and he knew how to arrange everything correctly. And he himself entered the role of a worried guardian who wanted to find his beloved stepdaughter as soon as possible. But why didn't Stephania and Alex think it was strange that Scott often went to the garage? Cooper chose days when Stephania was at work all day. But what about Alex? It's simple. He and his friends often went out to the street, posting flyers for his missing sister. The media is not told about this incident. Haru demanded complete confidentiality. The police know the story, but have not disclosed it to anyone. When Haru was hospitalized, doctors immediately began surgery. While in the hospital, Haru underwent 3 surgeries: pus removal, skin grafting, and hair transplantation. Unfortunately, due to frequent beatings to the head, where the left hemisphere of the brain was located, the skull was deformed to the size of a fist. This caused migraines and amnesia. Over time, the deformation itself was not noticeable, it was covered by her hair. Also, due to stress and beatings, Haru was diagnosed with infertility. In addition to the surgery, she was given a wax prosthesis of the injured eye socket, which imitated her eye. Because of the skin grafting, she began to wear elastic bandages, just to hide the scars. She filmed exclusively at home or when visiting those who knew her well. For the doctors who performed the surgery and rehabilitation for Haru, it was a miracle that she remained so strong and did not die from injuries. Her body did not develop in any way, it remained the same when she was 17 even in adulthood. After a while, Mitchell got back on her feet. As soon as her body got stronger, she began to practice self-defense and hand-to-hand combat so that no one would hurt her in the future. In this world, being a woman is dangerous, knowing what kind of men surround them. Mitchell actively underwent psychotherapy. She knew that she needed to move on. After all, she needed to let this situation go. If she did not, she would live in constant fear, as if even after his death Scott wanted her to be afraid of him further. Haru herself began to notice in herself that after the incident she stopped feeling fear. Also, her instinct for self-preservation decreased, so she had to remind herself in which cases she needed to be careful. Did her new state worry her? And how, if she did not even feel excitement? If this is one of the forms of fear. Also, from the beatings from her stepfather, Haru's pain threshold increased. Therefore, she could endure any pain. And, of course, she was not afraid of it. After the incident, the Mitchell family began to treat Haru with caution, more protectively. Stephania did not marry a third time, afraid that this could happen again with one of her children. The mother became very close to her daughter during her rehabilitation. Mary, of course, spoiled the children with various delicious food and desserts, but Haru especially. She cooked her favorite desserts and dishes almost every day, making the girl feel not separate in nutrition, knowing that she had to go through these 2 months in the basement and diets from doctors. The brothers began to protect their sister like the apple of their eye. At school, they made sure that no classmate offended her because of her acquired disability. At first, Haru was irritated by this behavior from Alex and Robert. But over time she got used to it, realizing that it was impossible to convince them. As for Mason, the man felt guilty, seeing what kind of friend he turned out to be and what he did to his niece, with the daughter of his dead brother. The man was afraid to talk or even look into Haru's healthy eye. He believed that she began to hate him because that he was on friendly terms with Scott. He blamed himself for the incident in the basement. He blamed himself for everything Cooper did to Haru. He considered himself guilty for all the crimes his friend committed with Haru. But the girl convinced him otherwise. Having seriously talked to her uncle about this situation in detail, she was able to relieve him of the feeling of guilt. But Mason still did not refuse help from a psychotherapist, as did the whole family. After graduating from high school in June 2016, she entered culinary college. After strict diets from doctors, she began to appreciate delicious food. And, of course, the love for cooking was due to Mary. So Haru decided to dedicate her entire life to it. During her studies, she made new friends, and one of these friends was named Sam Fisher, who would later become her boyfriend. After the events that she had experienced, Haru thought that guys would not be interested in her. She believed that since she was a third-group disabled person, guys would not want to be with her. They would find it disgusting when a girl had a completely empty eye socket instead of a healthy one. But Sam assured her that he did not consider this one of the signs of not being interested in a person. With such beliefs, the couple began dating. At that time, Haru was almost 18 years old. The relationship between Haru and Sam was good. Despite the fact that this was Haru's first relationship, the girl took it seriously. If there were any problems or misunderstandings, she would discuss them with Sam to solve them together. Everything would be fine if most of the meetings did not end in sex. Since Mason gave his niece the very same cabin in the village where all the murders would take place for her 18th birthday, this cabin was also the home of Mason, John, and their older sister. Aunt's name is not specified, when they lived with their parents as children. Sam, knowing that Haru had her own house, constantly offered to stay the night with her, and all their subsequent nights ended in sexual pleasures. Naive Haru thought that Sam showed her his love for her in this way, even when she did not want to do it. He insisted on it, and she could not refuse. This could continue on, until one event occurred. She was walking in the park with her friends. She accidentally noticed Sam with some girl she did not know. Sam's actions were intimate. He hugged the stranger around the waist, kissed her on the cheek, neck or lips. Looking at this, Haru felt disappointed. But the main question, why, without thinking twice, she took several pictures of Sam and her. So that the next night she could tell him everything. Quote from Mitchell's interrogation: "After I killed him, I had to strip the corpse naked. Did you have sexual intercourse with a corpse? Oh God, no. It's like killing a chicken and doing that to it. I've never done that to my next victims. It's disgusting and repulsive." Continue further: "I dragged the body into the bathroom and filled the tub with water. After waiting for a while, I carefully dipped the body into the water and took the necessary tools from the kitchen and the garage, What kind of instruments were these? A knife, a cleaver, an axe, a bone saw, and a blowtorch. I made a neat cut in the stomach with the knife and waited for all the blood to flow out of the corpse. I changed the water in the bath several times. There was a lot of blood, but in the end, it came out of him. I cut off the fat folds and flesh from the body with the cleaver, just to get to the organs and bones. I had to gut the corpse, get all the internal organs out of his belly. The hardest part was to carefully cut the spleen. One wrong move and the meat would become very bitter, if I remember correctly. Or it was with another organ. Well, it was disgusting to get his intestines out of his stomach. I needed the bone saw to cut his ribs. They were fragile, as I expected. I worked with gloves. I didn't want to stain my hands too much with blood, and not only that, where did you put all your internal organs? Into a garbage bag. You see, there was no desire to eat internal organs. I was only interested in meat and only that. And organs. I feel sick if I eat an organ of some animal, be it a chicken heart, a goose liver, and so on. And where did you throw all this? Rib bones, also to the forest, so, an axe and a blowtorch. What did you use them for? I needed the axe to chop the bones of the arms, legs, and the head at the same time. Sometimes I took a saw to cut the flesh evenly along with the tendons, but I hit the bones with the axe. I specially put a bucket so that the blood would flow there. I set fire to the limbs with a blowtorch so that the blood would not flow. I did everything with a dim lamp so that the neighbors would not guess anything. Did you feel any excitement? No, not a drop. Do you feel excited when you cut up a boar? I don't have cattle. But if I imagined it, I wouldn't feel excited. That's what I'm talking about. Haru, you often use farm animals as an example. Tell me, do you see your victims as animals? Yes. For me, people are like walking cattle, who can go anywhere and live their own lives. And if you ask me if I feel regret, I will answer, no, because people for me are like cattle, a source of food, a consumable. Tell me, when you had already dismembered it and then cooked it, what sensations did you experience when eating the meat? You know. When I ate it, I realized that I wanted to feel this taste again. Again and again. It was so delicious and amazing. The meat resembled pork and a little bit of beef flavor, and the texture itself was not too hard and not too tender. It was the perfect combination. At that moment, I felt real pleasure. The pleasure of eating such delicious meat. And who would have thought that the source of this wonderful meat is people themselves? It was then I realized that this is a real thrill for me and it needs to be continued, not stopped. After the incident, she realized that she would not stop, on the contrary, she would continue. Haru's personality changed dramatically. From a kind and cheerful girl, she became rude, sarcastic and harsh. She does not care about the feelings of others. She will tell a person everything she thinks about them. With her loved ones and friends, she remains kind and does not want to hurt their feelings. With victims, she behaves as friendly as possible, just to win them over. But in conversation with her, there is a note of black humor, especially about cannibalism. Her sense of humor has changed a lot. Now she began to use black humor much more often. If Haru did not eat human meat for a long time, she experienced withdrawal and treated everyone rudely and irritably. She could be irritated by how loudly a person could breathe or the tone of communication with her. However, she could easily restrain her rude nature when she needed it, and be friendly enough again when necessary. 15 hours have passed since Fisher went missing. The worried mother called her son non-stop, but never heard an answer. Only the subscriber is temporarily unavailable. Please call back later. Haru took care of this, made the phone inoperative. At the moment of scattering limbs and entrails, she threw Sam's phone into the forest. 3 days pass. The police began searching. Mitchell ate his meat. A week later, Sam's limbs were found. Haru had eaten Sam by that time. When the police arrived at Mitchell's hut, they noticed that the premises were clean. This is surprising. After the events in the basement, Haru became obsessed with cleanliness and self-care. So her house was always clean. And the girl herself was well-groomed. But this was not a bad mania, she knew the limits of her obsession. The police decided to question Haru. She was the last person who saw Sam the day before he went missing. Mitchell, in turn, behaved calmly. She was not worried that the police might notice anything, but when they told her why they were there, and when they said that Sam was found dead, or rather his remains, she began to behave as if the dead guy's girlfriend found out that he was killed, and the worst thing is that his body was dismembered. The police had no idea that Haru was the same killer who dismembered and ate the guy. They tried to calm her down so they could continue the interrogation. They got their way and removed Haru from the suspect list, said that they sympathized with her and left. But what made Haru cry so much? It's simple. She remembered Sam's betrayal itself, since during the incident she was immersed in other thoughts, and there was no time for tears. And when this moment came, she threw out all the resentment and anger from herself to make it easier for herself. Does she regret killing Sam? No way. Feeling impunity, as usually happens with most killers. This was not her last victim. In the coming days, she was supposed to have her basement renovated. Since it was already old and moldy, Haru planned to use it as a cellar for storing food, such as meat, fish, and canned goods. Living near the forest, her neighbors often spoiled her with game that could be hunted. There was already little space in her refrigerator, so she asked her uncle and her new neighbors to help with the renovation. Haru also bought a new refrigerator and several freezers that would be in the basement, as well as the old refrigerator, which could be used. In addition to her main job, a pastry chef at the cafe where Aunt Mary worked, Haru decided that she needed a part-time job to implement her perverted plans, one of which was in the example. The forest in which the village was located was popular for its landscape and wildlife. Tourists often went on hikes to explore the beautiful landscapes. But unfortunately, most of them got lost in the forest due to their carelessness. Therefore, a job like a rescuer was popular in the village, whose duties included keeping the forest clean, making sure there were no poachers, and also lead lost people out of the forest. Bingo is what Haru needed. After completing the full training, she learned how to use a compass, a map, how to save yourself if you meet a wild animal, which mushrooms and plants are poisonous, how to survive in the forest, and what to do if a fire starts, etc. The training lasted 3 months. During these 3 months, Haru showed good results, so she no longer needed to use a map and compass to avoid getting lost. She remembered the area well. Of course, she encountered her amnesia during her studies, but she described it in detail in her notebook in order to reread it several times. Thus, she remembered everything she needed to know. Having agreed with her boss that her part-time job would start on her days off, she began to work without days off for days at her main job, for days part-time. The only day off was if she was very sick or on holidays such as Christmas and New Year. She decided to kill only in the cold season, mid-autumn and late winter. In this way, she pushed suspicion away from herself. But in order not to be an immoral beast, she did not kill people such as disabled people, teenagers, children, pregnant women, pensioners. She also did not attack a group of people. She compared her chances against them and did not dare to do something bad. Quote from Mitchell's interrogation: "So, why did you choose to kill people in winter? Lots of tourists, lots of inexperienced people who get lost in the forest. And of course, I could have dressed all in black so as not to arouse any suspicion and hide the blood from the victim, Describe your typical outfit: a black winter jacket just above the knees with fluffy fur, black trousers on the hood and black boots. On the waist was a belt, where my cleaver with a case for it hung, an axe, black leather gloves, and a not very long scarf. Red with black stripes. Weren't people afraid of you when they saw a cleaver and an axe? I had a special armband on my shoulder with an emblem, which meant that I worked in the field of helping lost people, and they believed me. How did you look for the victim? Walking through the forest, finding a person, making sure that he is lost. I explain who I am and what the essence of my work is. Then I conduct a dialogue with the victim, where I learn everything I need about him. If the victim is not suitable, I take him out of the forest, but when he suits my preferences, I lure him deep into the forest, then kill him. How did you kill them? When we reached the depths of the forest where predators could be found, I checked if there was a living soul nearby. As soon as everything was clear, I quickly approached the victim from behind, cover his mouth with my hand, saying, "Well, there are predators here." When the victim becomes obedient, I sharply cut their neck with a cleaver. Did any of the victims attempt to resist? Yes, they did. But I stopped them. I was physically stronger than them, although you wouldn't know it by looking at me. I've been practicing self-defense and hand-to-hand combat for several years and still practice it after rehabilitation so that such cases as with my stepfather don't happen to me. What did you do with the body next? I stripped them down to their underwear. Looked at their clothes underneath. If there was snow, I didn't want to stain it with too much blood. And I started to dismember the body, chopping off only the arms, legs and head. Did you carry a bag of tools with you? Partially. I sewed inside pockets for knives, a saw, and other tools for cutting meat on the inside of my jacket, after the body was deprived of limbs and head. What did you do next? I carried a black bag in my pocket. I put some of my clothes, the torso, and then my arms on top of it. I left the head and legs at the crime scene. I didn't want to carry them with me. Then I wandered around the wilderness, throwing my arms in different parts of the forest. When only the torso remained, I went to my hut. I always worked with gloves and always took the tools with me, leaving no evidence against me. The limbs were found weeks later. Or never at all, since the predators ate everything. But you always left the victims' wallets and driver's license in the woods. For what reason? I wanted them to be known, for their loved ones to know that something had happened to them. That's why I never did that and didn't take money from anyone who had enough of it. What victims do you kill? It's easier to say who I don't kill: elderly people, disabled people, teenagers, children and pregnant women. Also groups with several people. And why didn't you touch them? Old people are already very weak due to their age and suffer from various diseases. Of course, there are exceptions, but it doesn't matter. Teenagers, they have their whole life ahead of them. They should explore this world, live for their own pleasure, learn to dream about their future. I don't want to ruin that. Disabled people, I'm disabled myself. And if I kill one of them, consider it an attack on myself. I didn't touch groups of people. I can't do anything against them alone. And what about children and pregnant women? The next question is too painful for me. Is that why you chose only healthy people aged 23 to 35? Yes. Did you feed your neighbors, relatives, friends human flesh? I would never do that. Even when people came to my house and I had human flesh in the fridge, I always told them that the meat was spoiled and I would throw it out. Do you think it's better for you to engage in cannibalism than for others? Yes, if I started this business. I will not, like typical cannibals, feed unsuspecting people meat from some Marie or Stan. I also don't want to get a lawsuit. How many days does it take you to eat human flesh? I don't remember, but you understand, when the winter holidays or mid-autumn come. And wandering through the forest looking for victims, in parallel with this, leading people out of the forest, I set the goal of killing 5 or 4 people. There were exceptions, but let's not talk about that. The reason why it killed so many victims: meat supplies. And no suspicions towards me. I understand the rule that after killing the required number of victims, you do not touch those people who suit your tastes. Lord, forgive me for saying that. Yes, I don't touch those I kill. I understand that the meat supply has been replenished, and there is no need to risk yourself so that the detective does not find you a detective? You mean Christopher Smith? Yes, Chris. During interrogation, Haru said that her interrogator fit her parameters, and if they met in the forest, she would not miss the opportunity to kill him and use his body as food. When asked why she did not touch children and pregnant women, this is due to her infertility. Haru gets along well with children, and since Robert had sons, she treated her nephews as her own children. Killing a woman who is expecting her child is the ultimate cruelty. By killing her, she will kill her unborn child as well. She did not want to deprive what was deprived of her in the past. She could have killed more people until the above-mentioned Detective Christopher Smith took up the case. Detective Christopher Smith was born on March 24, 1994, into a wealthy family. His father, Steve Smith, worked as a director of a car parts company, and his mother, Margaret Smith, was a fashion designer. Later, when Haru met Margaret, the woman would ask the girl to be a model and try on her outfits. Outwardly, Smith was an attractive and well-groomed man, 6 feet 0 inches pounds, 183 centimeters, tall. Black curly hair, distinct green eyes, and serious facial features. Because Chris often sat in dim light while working, he began to wear glasses for his vision. Christopher had a good childhood, like Mitchell's. His mother loved her son and spoiled him. His father tried to raise him to be a man who would respect society and be the one who respected people, regardless of status, nation, and gender. The boy studied well at school, mostly getting good grades, but if he only got a passing grade, he would get very angry. The young man often got angry if things didn't go as he expected or planned. He was quite a stubborn person. First he did something, only later he understood what the consequences of his actions were. Over time, he stopped doing this. First he thought and then he acted, or not to make hasty conclusions. The desire to become a detective arose in his teenage years. Reading his grandfather's collection of books in the detective genre, and was interested in the biographies of real detectives and serial criminals. Chris realized that this is exactly what he strives for, to become a useful person for society and someone who would help families by looking for their relatives or the one who killed one of their family members. After graduating from the police academy, he began working in his specialty. In his personal life, Christopher was a lonely man, not married. But while studying at the academy, he began dating his childhood friend. Later, she moved to another country. Connections by study. Over time, the couple lost touch with each other. Working as a detective, he showed excellent results, solving many crimes. He approached his work responsibly, did not take bribes from the criminals' families to hide evidence. On the contrary, he was an honest and decent person, always bringing the case to the end. One of such cases needed to be solved. The Haru Mitchell case, having arrived at the place where the crimes were taking place. He was assigned an escort who would make sure that Chris himself did not get lost in the forest, because the local forest map was outdated, and a new one had not yet been made. They also needed a person who would follow the detective if only he did not meet the local fauna and did not get bitten. One of these candidates was Mitchell. At the time of their acquaintance, Haru was 21 years old, Christopher was 26 years old. At first, Haru refused to cooperate with him. In the end, after the events with her stepfather, she began to hate all people working in law enforcement, thinking that they were all like her stepfather. Smith, knowing her past, on the contrary, wanted to prove to her that not all people should be swept under the same comb. He tried to show the best side of himself, winning her over so that she would agree to accompany him while he worked. In the end, she agreed because of her interests. During his work, Christopher repeatedly asked about the girl's life, what her interests, hobbies, favorite movie or TV series were. He tried to dilute the atmosphere so as not to walk the whole way in silence, trying to find the remains or passport of the victim. Mitchell reluctantly answered his questions. From time to time she showed her rudeness in front of him. She repeatedly thought about how to kill him now and as what dish to use his meat, but refrained. In the end, if she came to the village all alone, without Chris, there would be a lot of questions and suspicions. Therefore, she decided to help him in his case, thus waiting for the right moment to kill Detective Smith. Rather, Detective Smith moved to the village for a while, since the road to his main house to the village was about 3 hours away. The best solution was to move for a while until the investigation was over. Haru more than once stayed overnight at Chris's, helping him with the case. Of course, there was no intimacy between them. Haru, because of her past, was surprised why Chris did not want this. Sam always told her that guys always want this with a girl and it doesn't matter what kind of relationship they have. Christopher explained this by the fact that he respects Haru and will not invade her personal space to remove his sexual needs. He is above this. While working with Chris, Haru gets a pet, or rather a tame wolf named Snow. Christopher was cautious about his new friend at first, but as soon as he realized that the wolf did not pose any danger to him, he began to treat him calmly, but understood the danger of such a predator. Quote from Mitchell's interrogation, "We learned from some neighbors that you had a tame wolf." Is that true? Yes, that's right. I found him when he was about 2 or 4 months old. The poor thing had a broken back leg. It would have been terrible to leave the poor wolf cub without his parents to be eaten by other predators. So I took him in to have him treated by the vets. For what reasons did you decide to keep it for yourself? I don't know myself. I had experience with wild animals in the forest, but I've never had a tame predator. Fortunately, this practice was known in the village, so I had advice on some issues. In your village, wolves could only be kept by hunters. Such cooperation helped hunt game more effectively. And what did you name him? Snow. From the neighbors we learned that Snow was a good wolf, did not show any aggression, if he did, in those moments where there was a threat. In general, you raised a great friend and comrade. But did you give Snow human organs of your victims? No, I was afraid to do it. What if he attacks me, Chris or my other loved ones? Did you take it with you when you killed people? No, again my fears. I took him with me when I killed the number of victims I needed. You claim that your wolf has never eaten human flesh and has never bitten your victims. Well, in the end, he is a predator. Who knows what would have happened if I had done that? Nothing good would have happened. As they worked together, the pair grew closer and closer, until Haru's opinion of Smith changed completely. At first, she denied her budding sympathy, like, how can she feel that way about a cop? If she despises them. Later, she accepted her feelings and began to treat him better, not planning to kill him. In the end, she became attached and does not imagine how to harm him. Christopher felt mutual sympathy. He liked her new personality, which was revealed to him, cheerful, kind, attentive and caring. But Mitchell thought differently. She did not think that Chris was capable of experiencing the same feelings as she did for him. After all, after the events with Sam, she went on dates with other guys, where they refused to meet her again. Due to her disability. Even when Chris directly confessed his love to her, she did not believe him. But thanks to Christopher's stubborn nature, he managed to get through to Haru, so she agreed to a new stage in their relationship. At the time of their relationship, Haru was 22 years old, Christopher was 27. The couple began to live together, and it was only for the better. They complemented each other, not only treated each other with respect and understanding, they also cared for each other. Since Mitchell was blind in one eye, Christopher always walked on the left side next to her. He was her peripheral vision, which was missing. Christopher was a workaholic, constantly sitting until late at night, burying himself in his paperwork. The girl did not like that her loved one worked tirelessly. She set him a schedule, time for work and time for rest, and carefully monitored this, if only Smith could rest and not drive himself. Because of his amnesia, Chris always reminded Haru what happened yesterday or a few hours ago. He made sure that she was aware of all the events that happened to her. Sometimes he would listen to her retelling a situation that she told him, then forgot, explaining that each time she had a new reaction to this incident. And he liked it, he even admitted it to her. Of course, they had quarrels, but rarely. They always resolved them without loud conflicts. First they listened to each other, then came to a logical conclusion. The detective continued to investigate Haru's case, who in turn was his escort. Despite the reason why they were in the forest, Chris always liked to listen to his beloved's facts about nature and its inhabitants. He listened to her attentively, and thanks to her, he knew how to behave correctly when meeting a wild animal. Haru, being in a relationship with the detective, was happy. This man showed her true love, where both partners respect each other and care about the well-being of each. If they had sex only with the desire of both parties, and then they paid great attention to kisses and caresses, not quickly moving on to the sexual act itself. Christopher's superiors demanded at least some results from the case from him. The man, in turn, worked hard on this, did not sleep at night and literally fell asleep at work. He became very nervous and often smoked, just to calm his nerves. Haru was very worried about his health. She tried to console him. Christopher always brushed her off, saying he was fine and not to worry about him. He wanted to act strong in front of her, but she knew he wasn't fine. The last straw was when the stress and pressure from his superiors became so strong that Christopher had nightmares. Victims asking for help to find the killer, and their remains lying on the ground, decomposing. Or relatives of the victims, holding the decomposing head of their relatives, asking Chris if they had been found. After learning about such dreams, Haru decided to leave some clues on herself. Quote from Mitchell's interrogation, "I couldn't ignore his health. I had to do it just to make it easier for him to find it. Tell me how you did it. After the murder, I remembered where the head was. I waited for a few days, checked the place. If the head was there, I told Chris where it was. I also said that I allegedly saw a suspicious man in black clothes, walking around with a backpack and a machete in his hands, whom I never saw. This is absurd. Your actions have no logic. Literally telling the detective where you killed a man. Allegedly found accidentally, and gave a description of a man in black clothes. You yourself wore black. Some killers also gave the police details of their crime. But I had to do it. Christopher's health was at stake. If I hadn't done something, he would have ended up in the hospital. You're no better. Your cops couldn't get anywhere near me." Chris, on the other hand, found a lot of evidence. Of course, it was the remains and my implausible description, but I even managed to find this rowing machete to throw away. I did all this for him. So shut up and don't say anything about Chris's work. He tried, and you just put pressure on him, you brainless creatures. After that, the interrogation with Haru was temporarily suspended. The woman herself was not in the mood, did not want to testify further, since she did not like to remember the moments when Chris literally did not die from overwork. Having calmed down, she soon continued further. On August 20th, 2022, Christopher and Haru tied the knot. It was a new chapter in their lives, especially for Haru, a man who had been rejected for her physical imperfections. Finally, someone who was truly with her had been found. She changed her last name to Smith. Her official name was now Haru Smith. Christopher moved from a rented house to Haru's hut, and the couple began a new life. In everyday life, Mrs. Smith showed herself to be a loving wife who would feed her beloved husband. She never behaved abusively, never raised her hand, never made scandals out of nothing, and was never jealous. She helped Chris not to be ashamed of his scars. When Smith was only 5 years old, he accidentally spilled boiling water on his hands. This incident left scars that he could not stand. Haru said that scars were part of his body and there was no need to be ashamed of them. She walked calmly in front of him without bandages on her hands. She showed off her scars, a priority in the basement, showing that he was not the only one who also tried to hide them in plain sight, but only between them. There was no need to be ashamed of them. In general, she was a wonderful wife, just as Christopher was a wonderful husband. He helped his wife cope with her alcohol addiction, if only she drank less. Knowing that his wife wanted to have a child together with him, but could not because of infertility, Smith understood how much the topic of children together was traumatized for her. She believed that since she was not capable of a reproductive system, Christopher would find another woman, healthier than her. Smith said that if they were planning children in the future, they could try IVF or take a child from an orphanage. He did not care what their child would be like. His wife's happiness was above all else. Relatives accepted their children's choice. Chris's father considered his son's choice worthy. He said that Haru is a strong girl who has experienced many difficulties and trials in her life, but remained strong despite her health problems. At first, Margaret thought that she was no more than 20, worried that her son married a student who was 18 years old. But when the woman learned the truth about Mitchell's age, she immediately felt relieved. Because of Haru's miniature physique, Margaret considered that she would be an ideal model for trying on the outfits she sewed. Haru herself was not against it. After all, the woman allowed Haru to wear her designer dresses for any event, a date, a walk, a dinner in a restaurant, a family feast. The Mitchell family, knowing who Christopher works for, approved of the girl's choice. Stephania and Mary considered the man decent, kind, and serious about relationships. They were glad that Haru had such a person. Mason treated Christopher like his second son. Since Chris was weak in repairing, electronics and plumbing, Mason taught him how to fix a broken thing in this category. After all, Christopher himself knew that he would need this knowledge in the future. Instead of spending money on a repairman, he could fix it himself. Robert was skeptical about Christopher. Chris's behavior was too suspicious for Robert. He thought that the man was so kind and decent in public and in fact a mean and unpleasant person in character. But, after monitoring his sister's behavior and not finding physical injuries on her body, he calmed down and accepted Chris's character as the truth. Alex, a future 17-year-old teenager, considered the detective boring, as if there was nothing to talk about with him, and Chris himself was like from the last century. He did not understand what was so special about him that Haru found. Even when Alex and Christopher were alone, the man tried to impress the teenager so that he would not treat him like a pensioner. No matter how hard Chris tried to keep the conversation going and interesting topics that interested all teenagers, Alex still considered him boring, but accepted his sister's choice. So this story could have ended on a happy note. The victim, who became a serial cannibal, was able to change for the better. That's too naive. She continued to kill people and eat them. Secretly from Christopher, waiting until he was not home, she committed her crimes and carefully cleaned the house, only there was no smell of blood. Of course, during marriage it was necessary to lie low, just to preserve the family hearth. Christopher was able to change only her rude personality, but not her murderous nature. A killer who has tasted the taste of taking someone else's life will never stop doing it. It's like a drug. One dose, and then different consequences. Someone quits immediately, and someone becomes an inveterate drug addict, trying to cure their addiction, facing withdrawal. Like Haru, she rarely killed people, and then only one person. And then a long break and nagging thoughts, kill and eat again. No matter how hard she tried to control herself, she still exposed herself to her husband. The day when Christopher was at work. Haru, as always, was preparing for the murder. Having changed clothes, she went to look for a suitable victim. Having found such a person, she began to talk to him. It was a lonely lost woman, a blonde, 26 years old, neither disabled nor pregnant. Ideal meet. The more she answered Haru's questions positively, the deeper they went into the forest. Everything was perfect. Having already approached the wilderness, Haru acted according to her scenario, covering the blonde's mouth with her hand, saying that predators are found and she should behave quietly. Having taken out her cleaver in her hands, she was about to cut her throat, but no, Haru was quickly thrown to the floor and neutralized. It was none other than Christopher Smith. The blonde was a dummy. Smith decided to check if Haru was the killer he was looking for, since all the evidence pointed to her, but there was no proof. She told him everything. About the basement, about the meat, she told him everything. She confessed to all her murders, and she was the one he was looking for. The truth was pouring out. It was hard for Chris to accept it. As Haru herself said during interrogation, his face described complete disappointment, resentment, sadness, denial. He didn't even want to believe it. It was hard for him to arrest his wife, but he did it. Quote from Mitchell's interrogation, "Do you blame him for arresting you or no? He was doing his job. I was his goal from the very beginning. To catch and put behind bars. I don't hate him for it, no. I understand perfectly well that he did the right thing. Do you regret all your murders? Do I regret it? No, if I did, I would stop with Sam. But I keep killing and killing again and again. The only person I'm ashamed of is Christopher. He literally trusted me, and I did something terrible to him." Investigators also questioned Detective Christopher and asked him about his suspicions of Mitchell. Quote, "Yes. I suspected her of murder. The way she acted, as if she was carefully watching me enter the garage or open the refrigerator, and the spoiled meat. Our house was clean, even when it did not need to be cleaned. She often cleaned the house, liked to take showers for several hours. I kept referring to her incident with her stepfather, as if her love of cleanliness was because of that. But I did not even think that she was trying to hide the smell of blood in this way, not only on herself, but also in the house. I do not want to believe it. I do not want to believe that the one I was looking for was next to me. It is terrible for me to realize that my wife is the killer. She was good, but I do not want to think that she did all this." February 20th, 2024. Detective Smith arrested Haru Mitchell. When relatives learned the terrible truth about Haru, everyone had their own reaction. Stephania could not believe that her daughter was capable of such a thing. After a period of denial, when she took the parade, the woman began to cry often and tried to justify Haru. Why did she do this? Mary felt fear and disgust in front of her niece. She thought that all the meat dishes that Mitchell shared with her family were human meat. Even when Haru admitted during interrogation that she did not feed people human meat, Mary remained with her opinion. Robert believed that she was not responsible for all the crimes, but another person. Robert wanted to deceive himself, to make him believe that the real criminal began to threaten Haru with her life if she did not decide to hide all his crimes or just cooperate with him. Of course, his statements were meaningless. He himself understood this, but did not want to believe the truth. Alex was shocked when he learned that his own sister was a cannibal. He thought it was crazy. Haru couldn't do something like that, could she? After seeing all the evidence pointing to her, after hearing the interrogation tape, he felt fear. From an active teenager, he became withdrawn. Even when the topic of his sister's detention was raised, he didn't want to listen to it and immediately left the room. For Alex, realizing that his role model, a person close to him, who did not let him be offended, supported, helped, turned out to be a serial cannibal. Fortunately, Christopher provided the teenager with psychological help, noticing how much his behavior had changed. Unfortunately, Mason will live with a constant feeling of guilt. He was ashamed in front of John. He made a mistake getting to know Cooper. He shouldn't have let Scott near Haru. He was to blame for everything Scott did to her. He was to blame for who Haru became in the future. He was to blame for all the families of the victims who suffered at the hands of Haru and were eaten by her. He was guilty before everyone, especially before Stephania, seeing how the woman was going through this event and was sitting under sedatives, and not only seeing how his family was going through it. He felt guilty before them, especially before Haru. After all, it was his fault that she was a cannibal. What about the detective himself? Because of the disclosure of the case, the police temporarily suspended him from service, but over time, the police committee reinstated Detective Smith's service. After Haru's arrest, Smith doubted. Did he do the right thing by his wife? Maybe he should have just closed his eyes to it and continued living as if nothing had happened, ignoring that the criminal he was looking for was nearby. He felt melancholy. All these years of life together with Haru were wonderful. Now there was only melancholy and apathy. The man did not want anything, just to return to the past and just be with his wife one more time and ignore that she was a cannibal. The trial was held behind closed doors. Haru did not want to have a lawyer. She wanted to tell the truth herself, but according to the law, she was given one anyway. The most tense thing during the trial was how Christopher and Haru behaved. They did not want to look each other in the eye and constantly looked away if they crossed paths. In parallel with the trial, Smith and Mitchell divorced. Haru explained this so as not to ruin Smith's reputation. He could also find a decent wife. At first, he did not want this, but under pressure from Haru, the divorce took place. The jury found Mitchell guilty and gave her 25 years in prison without parole and sent her to a women's colony. As for Snow, this wolf was transferred to Wood Buffalo National Park. He took a long time to get used to the new area, and over time he got used to it. Smith moved to the capital city of Ottawa after the events, as he was invited to solve a new case. Even though his ex-wife was a brutal killer, a month has passed since Christopher moved in. Unfortunately, somehow 25-year-old Haru Mitchell escaped from prison. Also, the CCTV footage was erased by someone unknown. And to this day, no one knows who helped Haru escape and remove her criminal record from the police archives. We can only guess who it was. The police officers who were responsible for monitoring the CCTV cameras on the day of the escape were fired. And those who had contact with Haru, too. People are tenacious in Vancouver. Be careful who you talk to. This woman has not been caught yet. She also has a slight Russian accent when speaking English. Be vigilant. Haru is a danger to society. Be safe and try not to go too far into the woods for your own good. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. In memory of all the victims who died at the hands of Haru Mitchell.